We interrupt this broadcast to bring you Beyond the Box, our theological discussion forum, brought to you by Quartz School of Theology.
Oh, I'm a failure because I haven't got a brain.
Beyond the Box, www.whatson.net.
Well, hello and welcome to Beyond the Box. Today's topic is Jurgen Moltmann, the Theology of Hope. I can hear my wife typing.
Yeah, well, it's another show, another theological show. It's Beyond the Box. It's the theological discussion forum of Quartz School of Theology. Beyond the Box, you can participate in today's broadcast on phone, ICQ, or email. Let me give you those numbers. If you're outside the Antelope Valley in California, you can dial in 1-888-987-3100, or you can call local to the Antelope Valley, 661-538-2030. The ICQ number for today's show, 570-531-08. Or you can email thebox@theology.edu. All of this information is also available on the websites. There's the School of Theology's website at www.theology.edu, or the whatson.net website, and that's www.whatson.net.
Okay. As I said, today's broadcast will be on Jurgen Moltmann and the Theology of Hope. Jurgen Moltmann is a theologian who was born in Hamburg, Germany in 1926. He was raised in a liberal Protestant home where he received more knowledge of Lessing, Goethe, and Nietzsche than of the Bible. Like nearly all young German men, he fought in World War II. He was captured by the British in Belgium in 1945 and held as a prisoner of war until 1948. His experiences in the war and its aftermath brought about a crisis of faith for him. And this is what he wrote. In the camps in Belgium and Scotland, I experienced both the collapse of those things that had been certainties for me and a new hope to live by, provided by the Christian faith. I probably owe to this hope not only my mental and moral, but physical survival as well, for it was what saved me from despairing and giving up. I came back a Christian with a new personal goal of studying theology so that I might understand the power of hope to which I owed my life. And so at Göttingen, Moltmann studied theology under teachers strongly influenced by Karl Barth, and initially became an ardent fan and disciple of Barth, though over time he has become critical of Barth's neglect of the historical nature of reality and the eschatological nature of theology. Moltmann earned his doctorate in theology in 1952, served as pastor of a small Reformed church until 1957, when he became a teacher of theology at an academy operated by the Confessing Church at Wuppertal. This is where he came in contact with Wolfhard Pannenberg, who we may also talk about today, who became the other leading spokesman for eschatological theology in the 1960s. And this eschatological theology, of which he is most well known and for which Pannenberg is known, is called the Theology of Hope, and Moltmann actually wrote a book by that title. Throughout all of Moltmann's voluminous writings, one theme stands out as central: hope for the future based on the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The hope that he writes and speaks about is a realistic hope grounded in history and experience. It answers the deepest aspirations of secular as well as religious people, and for this reason his theology has struck a chord with audiences in the turmoil and confusion of the 60s. So, what Moltmann did is take eschatology, which has generally been relegated to the extremities of Christian thinking, and brought it more into a central place. And
right, I think what you said is kind of axiomatic. I mean, everything lies with Moltmann on the fact that hope lies in the future based on the resurrection of Christ.
Right, that's the central thing for him.
Yeah, it's that future to him is not, that eschatological future is not based, it's not just this extension of the past. It's from where God originates and directs, if you will,
right,
the path of man.
Right. Reality is not predetermined in his thinking.
Exactly.
Hope has a meaningful existence only when reality itself is in a state of historic flux and when historic reality has room for open possibilities ahead. And so he views God as a God of the future, and for him the future is not determined by the present, but instead the future determines the present. He would argue that the future is ontologically prior. And this is where we tie into Wolfhart Pannenberg. We also have to look at Frank Tipler and Tahar Desjardins, because all of these people, their thinking has something to do with what's going on with Moltmann's theology and the theology of hope.
Right. It brings a whole, when I was introduced to Moltmann for the first time about, a year ago or so.
Yeah, about that.
It brought a new dimension to the whole understanding of eschatology and how that relates, and that it's not just this separate theological endeavor.
Right.
It's really it's ground base for theology in Moltmann's mind.
Yeah, it's central to the Christian hope. That is, Paul talks about this hope of Christ's coming being our comfort. And for him and for Christianity as a whole, he would argue that we can't lose sight of that. That's the ground of our existence, is this hope that he is raised from the dead, and so we have that hope as well.
Exactly. I think that I have an actual quote here: "The future is the ground and origin of reality's new possibilities."
Right.
And I like that.
Yeah, he views the future as being discontinuous with the present also. That is, he doesn't view it as being, like I said, it's not that the present is going to lead to or cause the future through the natural course of events, but rather God is coming to us from the future and will alter the present and is continuing to alter the present. This also affects his theodicy. Last week we talked about
the problem of pain.
The problem of pain and suffering, particularly in light of the Holocaust, and I think that has influenced Moltmann's thinking as well. And he views the current reality as being almost incomprehensible unless God is not fully present now. That is, God is in the future, he is impacting the present, but his kingdom, the totality of who and what he is yet in the future, and so we're going to that place. We're not there yet. That is, God's kingdom does not exist now. Exactly. The kingdom is something yet future.
Right, and that kind of, it just brings up a little bit, knowing you as I do, it brings up a little bit of, that kind of ties into this whole idea of when at the Transfiguration that in Christ saying there are those present here that will not pass away until they see the kingdom of God coming, and here's the Transfiguration, and for all those of you out there, Robin would say that was like a glimpse, or you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a glimpse or a portal, if you will, into the future. This was this event. The Transfiguration reflected Christ's kingdom on the earth, which was a future event, but the disciples were allowed to see and partake of that future event at the Transfiguration.
Right. I don't know. Our tendency is, when we think in terms of time, we don't view the future as being as real as today. My wife is pointing ICQs at this. Oh.
Yeah, it's getting some information.
Just keep talking, jabbering away. Huh?
I'll interrupt you.
Okay.
The idea that this hope for the Christian lies in the future, based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It sounds, on the initial hearing, it may sound a little confusing to those listening, that our hope basically is based in the future, but that's based on the past. It was Christ's resurrection. So let's clarify that a little bit.
Well, this is where Tipler, modern physics, that sort of thing will come into this. When we think in terms of time and our relationship to it, we tend to view the past as being dead, the future undetermined, and all we have is the right here and now. And in some sense, time is simply another direction. That is, physicists today speak of space-time. It's a unified thing. And so perhaps a way to look at it is like a child would ask, what happened to yesterday? That is, where is it? Thinking in terms of as if it's gone, or where's tomorrow? To think in terms of the past no longer existing or the future not yet existing, in some sense, is a little bit naive. It's like us living here in Quartz Hill imagining that San Francisco doesn't exist because we're not there. And that's the operative term. That is, we currently are not in the past or the future, but it's no less real, at least from the physics standpoint. And so you see a hint of this reflected in some, at least on the surface, confusing biblical passages. In the book of Revelation, you have an enigmatic statement. See if I can bring it up here quickly. Probably not.
Well, while you're looking for that, ultimately, where I like a lot of this theology, Moltmann's theology, but there's a danger with it, and I think the problem with this future eschatology, at least with Moltmann, is that it led Moltmann to a rejection of natural theology.
Right. Well, of course, he was very heavily influenced by Karl Barth.
Right.
Of course, Karl Barth entirely rejects natural theology, or general revelation as being of any value or validity at all. And you can understand his reason for doing that when we talk about Karl Barth sometime next month, as I recall, or maybe it's in April. We'll get into that in more detail. But essentially, because of his experiences, Karl Barth's experiences in World War I, watching his theology professors fall all over themselves to support and encourage the Kaiser in his expansionist aims, he got a very negative idea of where general revelation or general theology or natural theology was taking people.
Right.
And so based on its misuse, he decided to just reject it utterly. Now, of course, to do that, he had to kind of tie himself in pretzels to interpret certain scripture passages. Well,
it's we refer to that as throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and we do that all the time, and it's not right, but and it can lead to error. Clearly, it did with Barth, and we see here with Moltmann, because you can't deny God's revelation in
the world around us.
Yeah, general revelation. Moltmann would have said that the present world, if it's truly out of order with God being seen in the future hope, then God cannot be seen in general revelation. I think that was pretty much the quote from Moltmann.
Yeah, it is.
And I would just, me and you, I know you too, would draw the line there. Clearly God, and we talked about this 2 weeks ago or last week, has
2 weeks ago. Yeah,
general revelation or natural theology is a very important part towards people stepping into this process of knowing God.
Yeah. Okay, in Revelation chapter 12, verse 18, you have thinking in terms of our relationship to time versus God's relationship to time. Revelation 12:8 says, "All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world." And so the enigmatic phrase there, the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world, is the one to focus on. Now, of course, the point of the passage is not to give us a clue about God's relationship to time, but we get this kind of as a sidelight here. Because when we think in terms of Jesus' crucifixion, it happened at a specific point in history. From our perspective, almost 2,000 years ago. And yet, here in the statement of John's in the book of Revelation, he says that the Lamb was slain from the creation of the world.
Right.
And so I would suggest, and Augustine even pointed this out, that time did not come into existence until the universe as a whole came into existence. That is, we make a mistake if we think in terms of God twiddling his thumbs for ageless eternity and then suddenly deciding to create the universe, because it's mistaking the nature of God's existence. That is, time is something that affects us.
It's part of the creation.
It's part of his creation. God exists in a different state, which is very difficult for us to comprehend.
Right. It's kind of the flatland book concept.
Right.
We can't conceive of a being that exists outside of time.
Yeah.
And
I use a fictional example to describe this, and every time I use it, everybody stares at me because they've never watched it. I guess it illustrates how poorly watched Deep Space Nine was, although I like Deep Space Nine. The first episode of Deep Space Nine, Sisko, who is the commander, or will become the commander in that episode, of the newly taken over Cardassian station outside of Bajor, and there's a wormhole. And in this wormhole are the beings that are responsible for the wormhole's existence and the maintaining of the wormhole. And Sisko gets into a relationship with them, and the creatures of the wormhole and Sisko are entirely different beings. Sisko, of course, being a human being, time-bound. The beings in the wormhole are not time-bound creatures, and so they have a great deal of difficulty understanding how Sisko relates to the universe, and of course Sisko has a great deal of difficulty figuring out how they relate to the universe. And it's a wonderful episode to kind of display the disconnect between the way God functions versus the way we function. Not that that was the point of the story, but still it's a useful analogy or illustration of the difficulty from both sides of interacting. And so Jesus came and interacted from our perspective in a particular point in time, but apparently from God's perspective it was a done deal at the moment of creation. And so then this brings us to my odd interpretation of the Mount of Transfiguration experience. That is...
It's your one and only odd interpretation of Scripture.
Yeah, right. I think just about everything I do is odd, at least according to the people around me. I think it's perfectly normal.
Yeah, and never mind, I won't go there. Anyway, Beyond the Box, you can participate if you would like. ICQ number 570-53108, or email us at thebox@theology.edu. Today's subject, Jurgen Moltmann.
Yes. For those of you who are wondering where Dandi is, she is under the weather. Specifically, she is sick. She has some strange infection.
Oh, I thought maybe it was raining on her head. Well, I'm sure she's listening. So
yeah, I guess she came down with it on Tuesday, and doctor says it could take her up to 2 weeks to feel entirely normal, although I guess she's feeling better. So
wow. Well, then
I can hope that she'll probably be back next week. We'll see.
Well, we hope you get better.
Hi, and she's listening.
Oh,
okay.
Oh, she's online? Oh, wow.
She'll go to bed soon, though. She's half asleep.
Yeah, well, that probably wouldn't be a bad thing for her to do.
Okay, well, it's Jurgen Moltmann and a discussion on the eschatological nature of theology and the future, or the hope for the future. If you'd like to participate, we have all that information beyond the box. You can dial in at 888-987-3100. That's the phone.
Assuming that you have an extra phone line into your house. Of course, if you're listening to us on your sole phone line, probably shouldn't get off and call us. Just ICQ us or email us.
Yep, and email is thebox@theology.edu, or ICQ is 570-53108. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be back in a moment. Beyond the Box is being brought to you by Quartz School of Theology. Beyond the Box is the theological discussion forum of the faculty and students of Quartz School of Theology. If you would be interested in enrolling, check out our website at theology.edu. We believe that a balanced theological education shouldn't cost you a fortune. We currently offer a diploma of biblical studies, an associate's degree of theology, a bachelor's degree of theology, and a master's of divinity. In addition, we also offer continuing education unit seminars on a quarterly basis. To find out more, visit the website or send an email to info@theology.edu.
Warning: life support systems not active beyond this point.
If you have an idea for the show, or there's something in theology that totally confounds you and you'd like to talk about it, why don't you send us an email at info@theology.edu. If you live in the Quartz Hill area and haven't yet found a church family, we'd like to invite you to come visit us. Quartz Hill Community Church. We are located at 51st Street West and Avenue K. We meet Sunday mornings for Sunday school at 10 o'clock, and our morning worship begins at 8:30 in the morning or at 11 o'clock. We also meet Sunday evenings at 7 o'clock. We'd love to have you come by.
Beyond the Box, www.whatson.net.
Okay, we're back again. And I have my spot here in Matthew chapter 17, which is the Mount of Transfiguration.
And I'm squeaking, sorry. chair needs a little oil.
Because you're old, or?
Yeah, the bones. Them bones.
Okay, Matthew chapter 17. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. Now, on the surface, you might think, why in the world would I think that that has anything to do with the future kingdom? The reason I might think that is because if you go to the end of chapter 16, specifically verse 28, it says, "I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And the story of the Mount of Transfiguration immediately follows that. And so, in some sense, apparently, what is being described there in chapter 17 is meant to be a fulfillment of that promise. Otherwise, one would have to argue that either some of these disciples are still hanging around, or Jesus' prophecy did not come true.
Well, you know, Jesus does mention that John's not going to die, right?
Yeah, except that John kind of discounts that at the end of his gospel. Although doubtless there have been some fictional stories written, and of course there were rumors going around in John's time about whether or not he'd be hanging around.
Right.
But John seems to quash that rumor.
Yeah, his stinking corpse did a good job.
Well, yeah, we assume that he has a stinking corpse. Well, it's probably not.
No, it's probably just whitewashed bones by this time.
But the point is that in some sense, Matthew 17, the Mount of Transfiguration, probably is fulfillment of what's described in verse 28. And so you can take it as either he is unveiling himself and showing them a little bit of his future glory, or perhaps he actually moved them to the end of time and they get to experience the final kingdom, which would perhaps explain the presence of Moses and Elijah. Of course, to get off on a little bit, people wonder, well, how did they know it was Moses and Elijah? Chances are this is very much a summary of what all happened. And we make a mistake if we imagine the Bible is giving us a complete accounting of everything that transpired. Probably there were introductions at some point. And the author of this and the parallel passage in Mark chapter 9 didn't feel the need to go into all the ins and outs of the conversations that may have gone by.
Yeah. Hey, you two, down there on the ground, shaking. Hey, stand up. I'm Moses. This is Elijah.
Glad to meet you.
Okay. Well,
this is not. Yeah,
go ahead.
It's not the case necessarily that this is the way it's to be interpreted, but in the light of thinking in terms of what Moltmann talks about, Pannenberg, Tipler, thinking in terms of the future actually being there and coming to us, perhaps this would be a way of looking at it. I
wanted to mention and just throw in here, and I didn't want to dwell on this that much, but
we can get off on bunny trails.
No, it's
anyway.
It's just, I think in a discussion of Moltmann, there's this guy Bloch who is he's a Marxist.
Well, he's significant. He impacted Moltmann's.
Yeah, he really
can't ignore him.
His Bloch was a Marxist philosopher, and he was famous for his statement that atheists, in order to be a good Christian, you have to be a good atheist, and that you need to transcend without transcendence, and I don't know, trippy stuff, but he's important to recognize because really Moltmann is a product of him and Barth.
Yeah, well, Moltmann's book, Theology of Hope, is a reaction to Bloch's book. Atheism, or I forget the title of the book. I probably have it here. Just go ahead and keep talking.
Anyway, so the hope of glory that's set in the future. See, Bloch in his book, he says we have to learn to be transcendent without transcendence, and that this is in the Christian. He says it's an on and has no hope of glory, just self-betterment. See, if you take the spiritual out of the philosophy, that's what Moltmann ultimately came up with. He says, okay, he liked what Bloch said in the non-spiritual, and he said, but if you apply that to your life, it's just an on, and there's no fulfillment, there's no future, there's no hope in that, and it just results it dwindles down to self-betterment only. And being a Christian theologian, Moltmann took that and said, but a theology of hope has a conclusion with an ultimate glory state. In other words, it can lead somewhere, and it does lead somewhere. It leads to this future hope that Moltmann talked about. And it's not just this on circular thing that has no hope, no future, just ends in self-betterment. It actually, this process of transcending without transcendence does bring us to this future glory and this future hope. So basically, he took what Bloch said and he spiritualized it almost.
Exactly. Let's see.
Anyway, but
I have Ernest Bloch's The Principle of Hope, but I don't think that was the title of
I think
book.
I think it was Atheism in Christianity was the title of the book. But whatever. Moltmann also differed from Barth on some small things, although he was a student of Barth and he was greatly influenced by Barth and Bloch. Moltmann would say that God moves the heart of...
I think that may have been the title, The Principle of Hope.
Okay.
Anyway,
Moltmann would say that God moves the heart of man, not through his revelation and general revelation, but through the hopelessness of the current state of the planet. See, rather than God revealing himself, Moltmann would say, through general revelation, that God kind of does reveal himself in the hopelessness, in the hopeless state that we're in.
Right.
And which, to me, you could argue is general revelation in a sense, but it is this hopelessness that drives man to God and not the revealing of himself through general revelation. That's where Moltmann would go, and that's and that is actually a little bit different than Barth. I don't think even Barth would have gone that far. Barth absolutely denies any possibility of God revealing himself in natural theology.
Yeah, Barth described Moltmann's book as exasperating.
Okay.
I mean, he thought it was important, but aspects of it bothered him, and obviously Moltmann's somewhat looser
with the general revelation, natural theology idea. Well, and I think he may have come to a conclusion that God doesn't reveal himself through natural revelation, but as I just said, he would argue that this hopelessness reveals the need for Christ, and as I also said, I think it's just a semantic problem at that point, because essentially, to me, that qualifies as general revelation, the hopelessness, crying out for the need for God.
Yeah, he can see. I've got an interesting statement here. It says, instead of conceiving of revelation as a supernatural incursion into history from beyond or as a natural capacity of humans in history, he described it as the promise of totally new and unexpected events in the future that can be anticipated in the present. the future contradicts the present, opens it to a new totality of being not already inherent in it.
Now, how would we relate? Because everything was all real thinking to this point was causal.
Right. Well, he does accept the idea of things that are happening in history now as being caused by previous things, but he views when God impacts or comes into history or into the world,
it's an interjection.
Yeah, it's an interjection. It's a discontinuity. It is not a natural consequence of what's gone before. That is, it's something that is entirely different. It's a unique event. Because when we think in terms of the resurrection, this is something that you don't see.
Exactly. This is God punctuating this timeline as it draws towards the future to redirect or to steer time, but it's being done from the future.
Yeah, he would, in Exodus, Moses asks God, what's your name? And God responds, traditional translation into English is, I am that I am. The Hebrew there is yeah, and that's an imperfect, and so alternatively it could be translated as I will be that I will be. And that's the translation that Moltmann, Pannenberg, and Tipler would prefer. Yes?
We would like to have natural theology defined.
Natural theology is the theology that can be determined or found by looking at the world around us. It is by looking at history, by looking at nature, by looking at the universe as a whole, we learn things about God. Both Karl Barth and, to a lesser extent, Moltmann would reject that as being a valid source of information about God. For myself and for the majority of theologians, they don't go with what Barth has done. That is, we understand why Barth reacted the way he did because the liberal theologians of his day were taking that as justification for some pretty reprehensible things. Same thing with the non-confessing church under Nazism. But the Bible does talk about, say in Psalms, where it says the heavens declare the glory of God. And so you learn something about God from looking at the universe. You learn that God is powerful. You learn that God is orderly. But natural revelation is limited. If you're curious as to exactly what you can get and what you can't get from general revelation or natural theology, the book of Ecclesiastes is a good illustration of that. As the author of Ecclesiastes goes through his argument, and this is one thing to keep in mind if you read Ecclesiastes, is it's a philosophical treatise, and it needs to be taken in one bite. It is the easiest thing in the world is to take pieces of Ecclesiastes out of context and miss it's a whole developed argument. You have to take all the points to understand what in the world the author is talking about. If you ignore the context, then you can come up with my life verse, which is Ecclesiastes 10:19, which illustrates the problem. I'll bring that up quickly. It says, a feast is made for laughter, and wine makes life merry, but money is the answer for everything. If that is an uncomfortable statement, that should be uncomfortable to you because I have taken it out of context. In the context of the author's argument, it makes better sense. But in any case, what you find from general revelation is that although you know that God is there, you know that God is powerful, you know that he's, at least to some extent, working in the universe, beyond that, you are limited in what you can know about him. Specifically, the author of Ecclesiastes points out that you don't know what God expects of us. Because in chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes, the author points out that, bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. Sometimes good things happen to good people, sometimes bad things happen to bad people, but there's no clear-cut cause and effect relationship. That is, essentially what the author suggests is that time and chance happen to all. That is, you cannot determine whether or not God will favor you based on your actions. That is, your actions don't seem to have any role to play in whether or not you're blessed or cursed. It seems to be chance.
Yeah, that was much of our discussion last week on Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his theology. And as you just said, but let me say a little something else. General theology only takes us, general revelation or natural theology only takes us so far. You said that. And that's where special revelation comes in. the general or natural theology may declare to the person who is taking advantage of it, if you will, that God exists. Mm-hmm. But how does God save us from our condition? That's where special revelation comes in. Mm-hmm. Special revelation being the Word of God, the Holy Spirit on the world today, and the like. So they work together to bring reconciliation between God and man. Mm-hmm. But this is why I differ so much here with Moltmann and Barth, although I like a lot of what most of what both of those theologians accepted. The importance of general revelation to me is huge. Mm-hmm. General revelation or natural theology plays a major role in people coming to Christ because God makes himself known through general revelation or natural theology, whatever term we want to use. The heavens declare the glory of God, and it's hard to look up at an orderly universe and say, gee, this just popped into existence one day, which it may very well have, but God being the instrument of that. So it just can't be downplayed. General revelation can't be downplayed. And a lot of Christians center on the special revelation.
Right, and special revelation also has its limits. That is, one needs both general and special revelation, and historically in Christianity, both things have been part of how theology is done. That is, up until the modern era, generally speaking, theologians were also well-versed in the general knowledge of the time, both science, history, everything, because if you're going to be a good theologian, you've got to have some sense of both aspects of God's revelation. Otherwise, you're only getting part of what God intends us to know about him. And just to take an extreme example, if all you do is focus on special revelation, then you can end up misunderstanding or not comprehending certain statements. So, for instance, you have Isaiah saying the trees clap their hands. If you don't take a look and see how trees behave, you may imagine that trees have hands that they can clap. If you have spent any time with trees outside of the Wizard of Oz movie, you know that they don't have hands and they can't do anything about clapping.
Yeah, well, the example we used last week was the scripture saying, "Go to the ant, O sluggard." And
right.
If you don't know what an ant is, how do you
trouble.
How do you understand that passage?
Right.
So general revelation does go much deeper than just the universe declaring who God is, but general revelation is everything that we know, think, and deal with, really.
Yeah, that is, we have general revelation going into special revelation that helps us comprehend what special revelation is talking about. It is, God, when he spoke to the human race, used the cultural values, the symbols of the people that he was talking to. That is, when he talked to the ancient Israelites, he spoke to them in Hebrew. He didn't force them to learn English or something else first. And keep in mind that all words are symbols. That is, when I say the word water, that's not going to satisfy your thirst if you're thirsty.
It makes it worse if you're thirsty.
If you're hungry and I say pizza, okay, that's very nice, but, be warmed and filled, it doesn't do anything for me. That is, these are symbols of the actual objects. And so God also used symbols as far as the religious, the liturgy and all that was associated with things. He used terms that they would understand. That is, if you took a stop sign into the ancient world, they wouldn't know what a stop sign is. And so sometimes we'll have symbols that he used for them that may be a little bit hard for us to comprehend. But the general revelation, what we know of the universe around us, impacts how we understand what is intended by what we see in special revelation. When the special revelation talks about the sun rising and setting, thanks to Copernicus, we now know that that's phenomenological language. From our perspective, sitting on a spinning ball in space, it looks like the sun is rising and setting. The reality is that this ball that we're standing on is rotating on its axis, and so it's an illusion. Because the sun isn't going around us, we're going around the sun.
Okay, it's the quarter hour, so let me give you the information. The program is Beyond the Box. It's the Theological Discussion Forum of Quartz Hill School of Theology. We'd love you to participate today. You can do so via ICQ. Our ICQ number is 53108, or you can send us an email at thebox@theology.edu. That information is also available on both websites, the School of Theology's website, theology.edu, or the whatson.net website, www.whatson.net. If you have a second phone line in your home, you might just want to call us. The number local to the Antelope Valley is 661-538-2030 or 888-987-3100 outside of the area. Okay, well, another issue, I don't know if we want to save it for the top of the hour, but concerns both Barth and Moltmann, and that is their idea about the inspiration of Scripture. Most contemporary Christians would differ with them.
Well, conservative Christians.
Conservative Christians, correct.
Although, it's an interesting thing. You will have some in the more fundamentalist circles that would say that Karl Barth is a horrible liberal, and that's a ludicrous statement. That is, Karl Barth is technically what would be classified as neo-orthodox, which is not liberal at all.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just realized how I can make the noise of a mosquito.
Oh, really? Oh.
Get away from me.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. Swat him.
Get a buzz in there.
All right, we're having fun here. If I put my mic near my laptop computer, I get a little mosquito sound. But okay.
And I'm sure that all our audience is very pleased to have heard that noise.
Okay, so you can thank me for that. But they would argue that the Bible is not revelation or
well, no, they would argue it's revelation. They would say it's inspired. Fundamentalists will talk about the Bible being inerrant, and neither Moltmann nor Pannenberg nor Barth would use that word to describe the Bible. On the other hand, all of them would argue that the Bible is absolutely authoritative.
Yeah, and they would say,
and they are reacting against the liberal wing of Christianity, as Ritschl and several of the other are actual liberal theologians, quite extremely. That is, Karl Barth wrote a book called The Theology of Schleiermacher. Schleiermacher is one of the founders of the modernist liberal approach to theology and approach to the Bible, and Karl Barth just blasts him in that book. I mean, it's very harsh condemnation of Schleiermacher. Karl Barth is a fellow traveler with the evangelical Christian community. He is a friend, not an enemy, and it bothers me to hear people disparage him as if somehow he is not fully committed to the authority of Scripture. He is fully committed to the authority of Scripture. He would not use the term inerrant. However, the interesting thing is, if you read any of what he's written, same thing with Moltmann or Bonhoeffer, any of the people that will be disparaged by some fundamentalists, one will discover that they quote the Bible the same way as if it was inerrant. That is, they would all say it's inspired. Now, what Barth and those who follow him would point out, and this is sometimes disparaged, but it's a true thing as far as it goes, that the Bible does not, they would say the Bible becomes the Word of God when it has an impact on a person's life. And from a practical standpoint, that's perfectly correct. It is, the Bible sitting on your shelf is not doing you or anybody else a bit of good. Unless you pick it up, read it, and it impacts your life, what has it done? And so what Karl Barth and the others have focused on is what happens when the Bible is read and it transforms an individual's life.
Sure, and that needs to be, and you got to be careful because this can just become a war of words that that both have the same conclusion.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest is part of the problem, and this is one of the problems with fundamentalism is that certain terms become overly important. That is, if you don't use exactly this term, then you must not believe like I believe. We had an example a while back where we had a ordination for one of our deacons, and one of the participants was trying to get the deacon to talk about his salvation experience in specific words. and he was not happy unless these exact words were used to describe what had happened. And, of course, the deacon being honorary just wasn't going to say them.
Well,
but see, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It is the meaning behind the words is what's critical, and you can use different words to express the same concept. And a lot of the disagreement that sometimes have with Karl Barth or others are more semantic differences, a misunderstanding of what they are saying, assuming they're saying something other than what they actually are saying.
Right, and I think, and even to an extent, this argument is it mirrors another theological argument that I want to introduce too, because he may not have used the word inerrant,
right?
But using the scripture as authoritative and using it as if it was inerrant, it essentially shows his cards.
Yeah, from a practical standpoint.
And it doesn't. It's not really an issue. This whole thing really kind of mirrors the limited atonement argument too. Those that would argue both ends of limited atonement.
Yeah, from a practical standpoint,
it doesn't really matter.
The same.
Exactly.
It is those who accept the idea of unlimited atonement still argue it's only effective for the elect, and so you end up with the same group of people being saved.
Exactly.
And so it's a whole argument over something that's hypothetical almost, that you can't even...
Right. It's almost nonsensical.
Yeah,
the argument.
It serves no final purpose. From a practical standpoint, how it works out, it's the same. Of course, those that are extremely reformed will argue with us about this. Be very unhappy I said this, but then I am not reformed. On the other hand, I'm not Arminian either. So, there you go. So of course, the Reformed people would say, yes, you are Arminian if you're not Calvinist.
Yeah, right.
Those are the only two possibilities.
Yeah, right. And mutually...
Oh, well.
Whatever. Okay, so dealing with Barth and Brunner even had very similar ideas about the inspiration of Scripture.
Yeah. I have more issues with Brunner than I would have with Barth, although I do have a big issue with Barth on general revelation or natural theology.
Right, but the inerrancy issue is not really...
Yeah, I think that's overstated. I don't think...
Blown out of proportion.
It's just not something that Karl Barth really focused on, particularly any more than until, that is, our current doctrine of inerrancy, like many doctrines from the whole history of the Church, is a reaction against heresy. And you end up getting these very precise definitions in response to mistakes that have been made.
Yeah.
And when we think in most fundamentalists today would say that Martin Luther was a Christian. That is, the person that started the Reformation. And yet, Martin Luther did not like the book of James. He called it an epistle of straw. And you also have his reaction to a particular problem in the book of Matthew, where Matthew says, thus spoke Jeremiah the prophet, and then he quotes from the book of Zechariah. And Martin Luther's reaction to that is, well, so Matthew made a little mistake here. It's good enough that he managed to quote from the prophet.
So much for inerrancy.
Yeah, and so his approach to things is not compatible with the modern doctrine of inerrancy.
Right.
And yet, I don't think anyone would really disparage Martin Luther. At least I would hope not.
Yeah, we just bury his anti-Semitism and his other issues and go on with Saint Luther.
Yeah, this is an important thing to keep in mind, is that all of us are human beings, and we all have blind spots, things that we'll disagree with.
Right.
It is just because you disagree with one point or several points in a theologian's thinking doesn't mean that you need to throw out the entire package or disparage him and call him a horrible person. This goes back, I was trying to remember what I thought about earlier, and I finally got back to it. When we think in terms of how we approach these theologians, say Karl Barth or Moltmann or Pannenberg, 1 Corinthians 13 is an important thing to keep in mind. That is, one of the mistakes that is made sometimes is for people to read pieces of what they have read and then assume the worst. That is, assume that what they are saying is completely at odds with historic Christianity, that these are horrible heretics that hate the gospel and are bound for hell. And this is not reasonable. That is, what you should do is see if you are fully understanding that is, assume the best. is the theology of hope. Hope that they are doing what's right. See if maybe you're misunderstanding what they're saying. And too often in Christianity, we will always assume the worst of those that are outside our little group.
Well, exactly, and I think that's a product of us, as we talked about a long time ago, 4 shows or so ago, presupposition. We are so ready to see something that we disagree with, as opposed to asking the deeper questions. Well, what is this person saying by this?
Right.
And if it feels even a little bit contrary to something we may believe, we make that assumption that this is
contrary. That it is contrary and they are stupid.
And this is made more. Well, Bart, for example. Let's take Bart. He's more of a target because he was more a prominent theologian.
Yeah, well, he's the most prominent theologian of the 20th century.
Exactly. So he's
usually considered to be the greatest theologian since.
And he's wearing a big red circle.
Whatever.
And you know, and I've seen Bart misquoted numerous times from all different people. That the Jehovah's Witnesses take him. Wow. I'll tell you what, they have a pamphlet, Why You Should Not Believe in the Trinity, or Should You Believe in the Trinity. And they quote Bart throughout that thing as a non-Trinitarian.
Which is ludicrous.
Yeah. He's very Trinitarian. But anyway.
They do the same thing with various church fathers, try to claim church fathers, and it's simply not the case.
Yeah. You know, the people who are outstanding are going to be the biggest targets.
Right. And one can I'm trying to remember, I think it was one of the people involved in the Inquisitions who wrote or said, give me 2 lines written by the most honest of men, I'll find something therein to hang him with. And, I mean, you can always, it's like the passage I misquote or took out of context in Ecclesiastes. I mean, just by itself, Ecclesiastes 10:19 seems completely at odds with the rest of Scripture.
Exactly.
The answer to everything is money. That's what it says.
It's not.
No, probably not.
Oh, well. Can I try it?
Well, actually, that's what the author of Ecclesiastes, one of the things the author of Ecclesiastes did try to do. Didn't quite work for him.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to go to a little break here. The show is Beyond the Box, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Beyond the Box is being brought to you by Quartz Hill School of Theology. Beyond the Box is the theological discussion forum of the faculty and students of Quartz Hill School of Theology. If you would be interested in enrolling, check out our website at theology.edu. We believe that a balanced theological education shouldn't cost you a fortune. We currently offer a diploma of biblical study, an associate's degree of theology, a bachelor's degree of theology, and a master's of divinity. In addition, we also offer continuing education unit seminars on a quarterly basis. To find out more, visit the website or send an email to info@theology.edu.
Warning, life support systems not active beyond this point.
If you live in the Quartz Hill area and haven't yet found a church family, we'd like to invite you to come visit us. Quartz Hill Community Church. We are located at 51st Street West and Avenue K. We meet Sunday mornings for Sunday school at 10 o'clock, and our morning worship begins at 8:30 in the morning or at 11 o'clock. We also meet Sunday evenings at 7 o'clock. We'd love to have you come by.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa. I want to talk to you about Beyond the Box. I'm 6 years old, and even I understand it sometimes, so I think you should listen. Goodbye, and God bless.
If you have an idea for a show, some topic that you'd like us to discuss, just give us an email at info@theology.edu, and if we like your idea, maybe we'll use it.
Beyond the Box, www.whatson.net.
Okay, we're back. We're going to, I'm going to do an experiment here. I want to see if we can get this. Okay, we can. Go ahead and put the thing back up there.
About the benefits of an education at Quartz Hill School of Theology. This is your brain after Quartz Hill School of Theology.
Why, yes, Robin. The eschatological implications of that is astounding.
Well, yeah, and this is your brain without Quartz Hill School of Theology.
The Bible says that?
Okay, we thought we'd play around. We thought we'd play around a little bit, but anyway. So we're back to Moltmann, the Theology of Moltmann. The show is Beyond the Box. It's the theological discussion forum of Quartz Hill School of Theology, and we'd encourage you to participate by any way you want to participate. You've got all the numbers. That information is on the School of Theology's, poor Ruth, School of Theology's website, and that's theology.edu. Say hi, Ruth.
Hi, Ruth.
Okay. And or you can go to what'son.net.
You're not even blonde.
That's www.what'son.net.
Somebody has to fill in for Dandi.
Ah,
okay.
And she's not on right now, so she won't know until she archives this.
Yeah, we won't let her listen. Oh, look, somebody bumped the button. It's not recording.
Okay, so it's the Theology of Moltmann. We're discussing various aspects of it. We're going to take a shift here in a minute, but I wanted to talk about how complex Moltmann's Trinitarian theology is. Because of his hang-ups with natural revelation and God directing from the future, he cannot be fully above us or in us until the future. It presents a little bit of problems, and he had to get a little complex with Christ on the cross,
right?
And with the particularly, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And he explained it as Christ having this godlessness inside of God, or actually that God has this godlessness inside of God, which allows Christ to say, why have you forsaken me? And it's really, God is not fully God almost, or formed, or I don't know the terminology he would use, until this future state, until God is where he's at. So that allows some of that.
Yeah, although from God's perspective, it's all a done deal.
Exactly, but
the problem is how we. Okay.
See, but it's this godliness inside of God that allows him to enter into from the future, into our current state and deal there and dwell there and work among us. And this, not only is this complex, it goes contrary to, I think, this dismissal of general revelation as well.
Right.
In other words, in the Psalms, if I make my bed in hell, you are there. Well, how do we explain that? Well, Moltmann would say it is explainable through this godliness inside of God. A godlessness inside of God.
Right.
So it's just, there's some big hoops there to jump through.
And of course the problem for some as they read that is they assume that Moltmann means something contrary to orthodoxy in what he's saying. What he's doing is Moltmann is orthodox. He's simply trying to make sense of it. That is, he's trying to come up with a way of explaining the reality of these traditional statements. Well, that is, he accepts the traditional statements. He's just trying to say, okay, well, now how does this work? Whether we accept his explanation or not is another issue, but we should not accuse him of unorthodoxy.
No, I agree. He's actually trying in a world and in a realm of thought where everybody's hunkering down in their corners. There you have the immanence corner, you have the transcendence corner,
right?
And Moltmann is really trying to reconcile immanence and transcendence in this statement.
Yeah, and the book that we used for the theological systems class, that's kind of the theme of the whole thing. That is, historically throughout Christianity, you've had this back and forth between an overemphasis on God's immanence or an overemphasis on God's transcendence.
Right, and Moltmann's trying to reconcile and trying to find some middle ground there, I think. He himself, and see, we were talking about terms and how terms really scare us to death sometimes. Yeah. He himself would label his idea on the Trinitarian as Trinitarian panentheism.
Yeah,
and,
panentheism.
Yeah.
Right, and see, the problem is that a word can become a you can push somebody's button with it.
Sure.
And so they react negatively to the word before they even know what it is that you mean by the word.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's impossible to predict whether a word is going to bother people. Now, obviously, a word like panentheism is going to bother a fundamentalist automatically.
Exactly.
Before they even hear what it is that Moltmann means by it. And the problem is when you're discussing things in theology, you're dealing, that is, we are finite creatures trying to deal with the infinite. And so we struggle with coming up with terms to explain what it is that we mean, and so we will recycle old terms and put new meaning. And the Bible does the same thing. That is, in John, he talks about being born again, or being born from above. This was not a brand new phrase that had not existed prior to that. Or the word ecclesia, which we now think in terms of the church, that was just for a political assembly in Greece, but it was infused with a new meaning in Christian thinking. For that matter, even the way we use the word love, it developed as a consequence of how it's used in Christianity. And so it's not a bad thing to take old terms. We have to take terms that already exist and redefine them. And sometimes we don't allow people to redefine them. We just hear the old meaning and immediately reject it and stop listening. Yeah, and that's very unfortunate.
And that leads to a lot of the, this is a total tangent, and I apologize, but that leads to a lot of the problems with KJV versus any modern translation. That our vocabulary, actually the meanings behind some of the vocabulary, the same words we use now, are the meanings are totally different now than they were in those days. So
yeah, words change, and so you get a completely wrong impression of what is being stated in Scripture. For instance, King James says, "Avoid all appearance of evil," and so in 1 Thessalonians, was it 5:14? I think it is. I could be wrong. Probably am. Doing it off the top of my head, always a dangerous thing. But in any case, the legalists and the busybodies of the world love that verse, because if you can't find any other passage in the Bible that says that something's bad, well, you can always use that one and throw it at people. The problem is that that's not what that verse means. It doesn't mean that if it simply looks like a bad thing, then you should avoid it. And one realizes the absurdity of that interpretation when you stop and think, okay, Jesus spent time with prostitutes, tax collectors, he hung out with sinners a lot, he was doing all sorts of things that appeared wrong. He spent a long time talking to the single woman who was a prostitute and had several husbands and kind of a sleazy character. And so you have him doing things that on the basis of the interpretation of that verse would be bad. And you can't assume that Jesus is doing something bad. Thus, if you have an absurdity, perhaps you've misinterpreted something. So we go back to 1 Thessalonians 5:14 and look at modern standards.
Christ was on the earth today and we saw him walking out of a liquor store. What kind of conclusion would we draw?
Yeah. That
he was ministering to the worker, or that he was boozing it up inside?
Yeah, actually, Jesus critics, it's 5:22, 1 Thessalonians 5:22. His critics, exactly that's what they did. They accused him of doing bad things. They accused him of being a drunk. What the passage actually says in 1 Thessalonians 5:22 is, avoid every kind of evil. And the King James, when it translated avoid every appearance of evil, it meant avoid evil whenever it shows up. Not if it looks like it. But see, there's been a shift in our comprehension of that word appearance, and so we get this weird...
When evil appears, avoid it, not avoid looking like you're doing something evil.
Yeah, that is,
we all look like that way anyway.
Yeah, it's inevitable. That is, you cannot avoid, you cannot avoid looking bad.
You just look on the webcam. You can't tell me Robin doesn't appear to be something evil.
Okay, so...
Okay, so Robin, you wanted to jump into...
Yeah, I thought that the Theology of Hope, which you have from Moltmann, Pannenberg has also been described as the theologian of hope, and this ties into something that came out, and actually Teilhard de Chardin uses the term first, the omega point theory. And this is, again, the assumption that God is in the future, drawing us to himself, drawing us to him there in the future. And so Frank Tipler, who is a
Teilhard Deschardins is a Jesuit priest,
right,
and a theologian. I think he was ecumenical, wasn't he?
That was a big push of his.
Big part of his. And,
right.
And I'm just trying to give a little background here.
He's been criticized he's been criticized somewhat by the Vatican since his death, but at the time he was very, very popular, and he's still very popular in some circles.
Yeah, but but his writing wasn't his writing a no-no on the no-no list with the Catholic Church. Right. Yeah, they banned his writings.
Right.
Until after his death, when I think they finally gave him his status back some years after his death.
And this is not to say that we entirely endorse everything that Teilhard de Chardin talks about. I have issues with several of his points.
As with all these guys.
Still, we want to focus on this particular phrase he came up with, the omega point theory. And Frank Tipler, who is a particle physicist in Tulane University in, where is that, Louisiana, I think it is, wrote a book that was published in 1994 called The Physics of Immortality, in which he argues that modern physics, and he's been severely criticized for this and among many other scientists, he would argue that modern physics suggests strongly that there is a God and that he is essentially the God of the Bible. And so Pannenberg particularly has talked about Frank Tipler's book and has argued somewhat favorably towards his suggestions. And actually Pannenberg and Tipler have corresponded and worked with each other to some extent. Tipler has not been universally criticized in the scientific community. David Deutsch, another fairly well-known physicist, has been quite happy with Tipler's theory. Actually, it's rather interesting. Deutsch criticizes Tipler's theology, and Pannenberg is uncomfortable with Tipler's science. So you have a scientist who's not entirely happy with Tipler's theology, and you have a theologian who's a little bit questions some of Tipler's science. So, in any case, the omega point theory of Frank Tipler starts from three presuppositions. The first and most important one is the anthropic principle. In its sharpest form, claiming what?
I was just viewing our
claiming that life and intelligent. We've actually got listeners.
Yeah, we
cool.
There's one in Pacoima.
Okay. He had nothing else to do on his area.
Yeah. The guy I'm paying to listen.
Oh, is that it? Oh,
$10 extra bucks to get him to email me.
Oh, well.
The anthropic principle claims that life and intelligent life are not only necessary within our universe, but can also no more disappear from their first emergence. Rather, they are destined to pervade and dominate the entire universe. Essentially, the anthropic principle argues that the universe needs to be fine-tuned for our existence. As you look at the basic physical laws of the universe, if you were to alter any of them a fraction of a %, you would end up with a universe where life wouldn't exist.
Right, and that, so you can almost get into a circular argument.
Yeah, it is a circular argument, and the anthropic principle is an uncomfortable thing, particularly for scientists, or some of them, because it does raise the issue of
which came first, the chicken or the egg?
No, but why? Okay, you have the basic forces in the universe: electromagnetism, the weak force, the strong force, and gravity. And actually, the weak force has been combined with electromagnetism. That's now called the electroweak force. Gravity and the strong force are still separate. The weak force is what allows subatomic particles to decay. That is, it's the cause of radioactivity. Electromagnetism, of course, is why you can listen to us and why your computer runs when you plug it into a wall socket.
And gravity is why it hurts when you fall.
Yeah, gravity is why it hurts when you fall, and the strong force is why atoms hold together.
Right.
And the strong force is the strongest of the natural forces in the universe, but also operates over the shortest distance. That is, it operates only over the distance of an atomic nucleus. And beyond that, it's not usable. Gravity has the longest reach, but it's also the weakest of the forces. Now, the point is...
kind of like radio waves. Those high frequencies don't go as far. Those low ones.
You forgot one.
Go across.
Come to the dark side of the force.
Well, the Star Wars
Anyways,
story.
these forces are in it. They have a certain relationship to each other, and the question is, why are these forces the way they are? That is, if you were to have gravity slightly stronger, then you would end up with stars not lasting long enough for life to develop. If the weak force were weaker, then you wouldn't have radioactive decay, and then you wouldn't have the elements develop. Strong force, atoms wouldn't hold together.
We'd be flying apart. It'd be a bloody mess.
All these things have to be exactly the way they are within a certain balance, or else the universe doesn't function the way we have it now.
The ideal weapon of war.
You'd end up with a lifeless universe. And so the question, of course, is why. And so the anthropic principle is that the universe seems to have been fine-tuned for our existence, which is kind of an odd thing. Now, as a theistic person that believes in God, it makes sense. That is, we assume that God would design the universe to function. So
sure, and where I said it's really a circular argument is, one might argue, well, we're here,
right,
and we. So obviously it would have to be conducive to our life because we're here, and we could argue the converse.
Yeah, it's just, well, it happened. It got this way, isn't this nice? And so we're here to ask why.
And if it was different, we'd be in some weird different form.
No, it just wouldn't exist.
Yeah, it would be another creature. Well, I'm thinking in terms of like the food chain, if you will, or the you eliminate one aspect of the ecosystem and something else adapts to take its place.
Right.
And I mean, I think you'd see the same thing with humanity.
Yeah. So anyway, the first of his presuppositions, keep in mind, presupposition is an axiom. It's like in geometry, you have the definition for a point, you have definition for a line, you have definitions for various things. These definitions you just accept as givens, you can't prove them. From these axioms, then you develop the theorems, which you have to prove. You memorize these long things, and you take geometry, if you remember, from high school or college. But the axioms, there they were, and you accepted them. So that's what presupposition is. It's just something that you have to accept as a given, or else you reject it as a given and come up with something entirely different. You cannot prove or disprove an axiom or a presupposition.
Exactly.
So this is one of the presuppositions underlying Frank Tipler's megapoint theory. Second presupposition is the assumption that the expansion of the universe, the history of which, according to cosmological standard theory, began with a Big Bang about 15 billion years ago, will not continue indefinitely, but enter into a phase of contraction under the influence of gravitation until this will finally end in a big crunch, a collapse of the matter of the universe within a small space. An analogy with the black holes that originate even in the present phase of the universe by collapse of matter.
And again, theology is ever-changing. I mean, and the reason I'm saying this and bringing this up is if the universe proves to be a +1 universe, then or would it be -1? It'd be +1.
Yeah, that is, it doesn't have.
It's not
if it doesn't have, if it doesn't have enough mass in it, and actually the current evidence suggests that Tipler is wrong on this presupposition. Current evidence suggests there is not enough matter in the universe to cause everything to recollapse on itself.
Exactly. So
the universe looks like it's just going to expand forever.
But see, how many people would say, okay, he's wrong on this one point, throw him completely out.
Right.
But see, it's incorrect. We need to reformulate it.
Yeah, and that's what Tipler has done. That is, he recognizes the problem with this particular part of his theory. And obviously, if the universe is not flat, if it's going to continue expanding forever, then his theory will have to be modified rather considerably. His third presupposition is that the energy available in the universe is unlimited. Therefore, our universe will not end in a state of maximum entropy, but possibly in a state of eternal life, which means maximal information processing. According to Tipler, life is essentially accumulation of information, and on its path toward the omega point, life has to pervade and finally dominate the entire material universe. The omega point itself, however, will be a place of maximal accumulation of information, therefore it will be immanent as well as transcendent with relation to each point in space-time. Therefore, the omega point will have the properties of personality, omnipresence, omniscience, omnipotence, and eternity. And so the omega point in Tipler's theory is essentially another name for God. And these properties of the omega point provide in final future the universe with the capacity of creating the whole universe. That's the other odd thing about Tipler's theory, and it parallels what you see in Moltmann and Pannenberg, which is that the future causes the past.
Now, if the universe were to contract and come into this great crunch, then where does that leave us?
Okay, well, one of the reasons that Tipler argues that is if the universe is going to end in a great crunch, the fact that the current universe is stable indicates that the crunch will be a controlled crunch. The only way you can have a controlled crunch, though, is if you have intelligence directing it, because the crunch that's just doing its own thing is not going to go smoothly. It's going to be very chaotic, and so the current universe should be very chaotic. It is not chaotic, therefore there has to be something controlling this. Therefore there has to be a God. This is the heart of Tipler's argument.
But what does that say for the state of man at that crunch? I mean...
Well, what happens, and this gets into relativistic physics, as you increase, what's the term I want? Either as speed increases towards the speed of light, or as you increase the amount of gravity towards infinity.
Time dilation.
You have time dilation. That is, time from the so-called external observer's point of view would slow down. And so essentially what you end up with the big crunch is you end up towards a singularity, and so time comes to essentially a stop, and you end up with an eternal now in which information processing can go on forever. It is, you never end up with a final crunch.
You just end up in this
eternal state of
continually going halfway across the street.
Right.
Okay. So Tipler now.
So Tipler, in his theory, explains how God can exist and how eternity can exist.
And he does it as a modern physicist.
That is, he moves from being an atheist towards a more theistic point of view. And he even comes down on the side of saying that this omega point is essentially indistinguishable from the Judeo-Christian concept of God. In fact, in his book, he argues against it being, his view being at all compatible with the Eastern mysticism points of view regarding multiple gods or Buddhism or any of the sorts of pictures that you have outside of Judeo-Christian thinking.
Yeah, well, the whole Eastern thought is not necessarily a logically based.
Well, it's not, despite, you have had some books in the past, the Dancing Wu Li Masters comes to mind, of some physicists and others trying to argue that modern physics is compatible with this Eastern mysticism. At best, one could suggest that they're both misunderstanding modern physics as well as Eastern mysticism. The two things do not go well together. Part of the reason that I think some have argued that modern physics can be made compatible with Eastern mysticism is the whole uncertainty principle, as if somehow, or the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, that somehow because our observations seem to have some impact on the way things turn out, that argues for the subjectivistic approach that Eastern mysticism is comfortable with. That's misunderstanding the Copenhagen interpretation, as well as the fact that you have about 5 other potential interpretations of quantum physics. And none of them are really compatible with Eastern mysticism. The Dancing Wu Li Masters is an interesting attempt, but it really doesn't work.
So if the cat's dead in the box...
Yeah, Schrodinger's box.
Anyway. Okay, so it's important to realize, too, coming back to the very first 10 minutes of our show, I think...
where people might have been able to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. The eschatological aspect of the church and of current theology as we're throwing in here. The church has always been, although this is a different kind of eschatological look at theology, the church has always been eschatological.
Right.
And it's always played a valuable role in the church. And somebody might hear kind of this whole future hope and Omega Point stuff and say, that's too weird for me, you know. But I think it's not as weird as it may sound.
Right.
God is directing from the future. And to me, that's comforting.
Yeah.
Because he's in this perfect state, this perfect place, and he's calling us to that point.
Yeah. Let's see. Pannenberg commenting on it says, let's see. These properties of the Omega Point provide in final future of the universe with the capacity of creating the whole universe. At this point of the argument, the time perspective of the description of the universe given so far by Tipler himself gets reverted. God in his capacity as final future of the universe is really its creator, who draws his creatures into communion with himself by way of the history of the universe. While we act from our present into the future, because we look forward to a future outside ourselves, God, who is himself the absolute future, places his creatures into an existence that precedes that future and moves toward it. So yeah, it is a hope. That is essentially what you come down on. This is why Moltmann and Pannenberg would both be classified as Reformed theologians. That is, they would see God as controlling this thing. That is, God is sovereignly orchestrating what's happening. It's not a random thing that's going on. It's part of God's plan that is being fulfilled and will be fulfilled in the final eschaton.
Good. Okay, the show is Beyond the Box. It's Quartz Hill's Theological Discussion Forum. We hope you can participate. The ICQ number is 570-53108, or you can email us at thebox@theology.edu. We have a phone number too. We're going to go to a two and a half minute break here, but after the break you can call us at 888-987-3100. We'll be back in 2.
Hello everybody, my name is Brian. I'm 5 years old. I think Beyond the Box is a really cool show. We talk about theology and all kinds of stuff about God. You should listen.
Beyond the Box is being brought to you by Quartz Hill School of Theology. Beyond the Box is the theological discussion forum of the faculty and students of Quartz Hill School of Theology. If you would be interested in enrolling, check out our website at theology.edu. We believe that a balanced theological education shouldn't cost you a fortune. We currently offer a diploma of biblical studies, an associate's degree of theology, a bachelor's degree of theology, and a master's of divinity. In addition, we also offer continuing education unit seminars on a quarterly basis. To find out more, visit the website or send an email to info@theology.edu.
Warning, life support systems not active beyond this point.
You are listening to Beyond the Box, a theology discussion group of Quartz Hill School of Theology. If you would like to participate in today's show, have any questions or comments that you would like to add in relationship to today's topic, you can ICQ us at 570-53108, or you can email us during the show at thebox@theology.edu. We also have a toll-free number, 888-987-3100. This information, if you didn't get it down, you can find at www.theology.edu as well as on www.whatson.net.
Beyond the Box, www.whatson.net.
Okay, we're back. The theology of Jurgen Moltmann. and we're talking about, well, actually we've hit Barth, Bruner, Pannenberg, Tipler. We've pretty much shotgunned everybody today.
Yeah.
But that's all right. Listen, I want to read this real quick, and, because in light of Hegelian dialectic
throw in somebody else that nobody.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Let's throw
all these terms that we use.
Well, his dialectic
you should
approach.
Explain Hegelian dialectic.
Okay, well, the Hegelian
to know.
Yeah, it is. The Hegelian dialectic is that for every thesis, there's an antithesis.
What does that mean, thesis and antithesis?
For every idea every idea that you would.
For every Republican, there's a Democrat.
There you go. There's a moderate. Yeah, for every elephant, there's a donkey. Yeah, and actually, for every idea that you might propose, there will be
a counter.
There's a counter idea, and then those eventually mold into synthesis.
Yeah,
so
they come together, and that becomes a new idea to which a new counter idea will come up against it, and it goes on this way forever.
In other words, Rick says thesis, Robin says antithesis, and those two meld together and form synthesis.
Which becomes a new thesis.
Exactly.
And then somebody else comes up with an antithesis, and so it goes.
Right. And now...
world without it.
And I like it, and it's good. Moltmann would see his dialectic approach to future events as potentially giving rise to paradox, though. Mm-hmm. And so with this in mind, Moltmann said that theological concepts are not judgments that nail reality down, but anticipations which show the prospects or future possibilities. Mm-hmm. And I like that. That's a good statement from him in light of the Hegelian dialectic. But let me repeat that. Theological concepts are not judgments that nail reality down. We accept that. We understand that theology is this ongoing process, that all of a sudden you don't wake up one day and your theology is set. At least I hope not, because if you do...
You have all the answers.
Yeah, there's a serious problem. But they're anticipations which show the prospects and future possibilities. Mm-hmm. But as we know, and we've talked about, Moltmann has that... He's coming from the point that the ultimate future is perfection, and God exists in the future, and that we are not being perfected through events in the past, but being drawn towards perfection from the future.
Right.
So it's good. I like it.
Yep. Exodus 3:14. I will be who I will be is the translation that Tipler likes, and Pannenberg likes, and Moltmann likes. He is the God of the coming kingdom. In hidden ways, he is already now the Lord of the universe, which is his creation, but it is only in the future, the completion of this universe, and the arrival of his kingdom, that he will be fully revealed in his kingship over the universe, and thus in his divinity. Therefore, the future of the kingdom of God formed the core of Jesus' message, as well as the objective of his prayer, thy kingdom come, Luke 11:2. And so Pannenberg says that Tipler combines the fundamental assertions of the traditional Christian doctrine on God. Omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence are closely related to the idea of an ultimate future as a place of maximum information. In his argument, Tipler correctly takes exemption from a conception of God as mind according to the model of our human mind, because a mind similar to our human mind is a manifestation of an extremely low level of information processing. God's omniscience surpasses the forms of our knowledge and is to be connected rather with his omnipresence. So, in many ways, what Tipler argues for is a fairly orthodox view of God. There are, of course, certain aspects of his view that are questionable. Another thing that Tipler says is that you will have an absorption of theology into physics. That is, if God is actually real, if he's really there, then he is in some sense physically knowable.
Well, I don't see them as mutually exclusive endeavors anyway.
No.
I mean, so I agree with that.
It's like what we talked about in the science and religion thing. That is, either God is real or he isn't. If he is not as real as the cheese sandwich I had for lunch, then he's not real. He's not there, and therefore we're completely wasting our time. If he is as real as a cheese sandwich, then he is an objective thing. That is, you can make statements about him which are true, you can make an infinite number of statements about him which are false.
Now, did you really have a cheese sandwich for lunch?
No, I used that
Well,
as
see,
an
then,
example.
yes,
Actually,
we're really screwed up.
Actually, all I had for lunch was a bag of popcorn.
Well, if something's as real as the cheese sandwich you had for lunch, then we're in real trouble.
We're in real trouble. So maybe the bag of popcorn.
Yeah, okay.
It's just
all right.
cheese sandwich sounded better and more positive than
couldn't-
saying I had a bag of popcorn.
I just couldn't let it rest. I had to discover whether you
Particularly if
truly
my wife
had
sitting
cheese.
here, if she's actually listening, she would think,
Yeah.
well, this is terrible. All I had was a cheese sandwich, or all I had was a bag of popcorn. This isn't good.
Yeah, but it was a 12-pound bag.
Yeah, it filled me up.
Plenty of nutrients there.
Yeah, that and the Sprite that I had.
Sheesh, don't jump up and down. Okay, well, and back to what I was saying about the dialectic approach and Moltmann. He made a statement, and I had to sit and think about this, and I'm not sure that I fully grasp it yet either. What exactly he's going with it, but that's why I brought it.
Read Moltmann very slowly.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it in. I'm hoping actually that you might get a better grasp of it. He says, I'm not so concerned with correct doctrine, but rather concrete doctrine, and thus not concerned with pure theory, but practical theory.
Right.
And where I can understand the words of that, but in trying to understand it in the concept, in the whole, considering what Moltmann believed and taught, if he's, I guess I see the relation in that he's not concerned with pure theory because there isn't pure theory in his idea. It's constantly being readjusted by God from the future, so he's more concerned with practical theory. How does what we have now?
How is it going to affect my life?
Right, exactly.
That is, what impact does it have on the human race, on how we get along with one another, how we relate to each other? That is, if theology ends up being simply how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, then it becomes somewhat valueless. Now, one should add a caveat here. That it's just like science, you cannot always predict how a particular look into some scientific endeavor is going to practically benefit us. All science is ultimately going to be beneficial, and so I would suggest that any theological questioning and study will end up having some practical impact on our lives. It's just that we may not be able to tell, well, how is this going to help me? It's kind of like a person reading, say, 1 Chronicles 1 through 9, wondering, okay, this is not real exciting. I can see how this might help me fall asleep if I have insomnia, but beyond that, what is the point of this long list of so-and-so begat so-and-so? And yet we have to take on faith the statement that Paul makes to Timothy that all Scripture is God-breathed and is profitable. How that is profitable requires more effort on our part than seeing the value of, say, Psalm 23. That is, Psalm 23 is easy for people to see, okay, yeah, that's a valuable thing.
Sure. How do we take the signature at the end of Romans of Paul's secretary who transcribed the book and say, okay, what doctrinal, what scriptural, spiritual benefit is I, so-and-so, who wrote this book?
Yeah.
Hello.
But we assume that there is a point to this. That is, that God put this there for our benefit in some way. And so I used the example of repairing a car. And if you're repairing a car, you need, wrench, screwdriver, those sorts of tools. A sledgehammer is probably not something that you need when you're repairing a car. You may feel some emotional desire to take a sledgehammer to your car when it's not working, but really it's not a good idea. But there are places in your life where a sledgehammer would be a good thing, like if you have to break up a big rock in your yard, then you might need a sledgehammer. And if you need to break up a big rock in your yard, a wrench is not going to help you a whole lot. And so the same thing with the Bible. It's all equally valuable, but it's not all useful for the same things. And theology, likewise, some of it may be immediately and obviously useful. And other aspects, we may wonder, okay, how does it help us to know how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Of course, that would be entirely speculative. Still, we can't just say, well, that can't possibly be of any use, and we shouldn't even ask those kind of questions. I'm always worried about people that say, well, why do you bother yourself with that kind of a question?
Well, why do they want to dance on the head of a pin?
Yeah. That is, questions...
Oh, yeah, do angels dance? Yeah, we're getting deeper now, theological.
Yes. Is we shouldn't be afraid of questions. We shouldn't view, okay, this set of questions, we can't ask that because there's no practical use for them. I don't see that as being a good idea.
No, I think all questioning, all endeavor into truth is good.
Right.
Well, it's back to all truth is good.
All truth is God. Right. And knowing truth is a good thing, whether or not we can immediately see the practical benefit. I mean, at the turn of the 20th century, and the early part of the 20th century, you have these people working in quantum physics, relativistic physics, studying the atom, and you have them saying, there's probably no practical benefit to all this, but, this sure is interesting. And yes, exactly, boom, by 1945, it had a very practical significance.
Well, I think they found it practical. It was a good hair remover.
Yeah, but I mean, even those who might think that knowing about the atom is a bad thing, if you have cancer or some other illnesses, nuclear medicine is a very useful thing.
A lot of people are saved by nuclear medicine.
Right. So, what we have learned from what seemed an entirely esoteric and impractical thing has turned out to be very, very practical. I mean, our computer electronic world is dependent upon our knowledge of quantum physics.
Exactly. Well, now I'm going to get into an ethical issue here because it relates.
And I think that's part of Pannenberg or Moltmann's point, is that theology does have practical
here and now applications.
It's similar to a statement that I would make that we're not saved by right doctrine, we're saved by our relationship with Jesus Christ.
Exactly. We know that we can be saved with some pretty messed up doctrine.
Yeah, we have examples of that.
We have poster boys for that.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, a lot of scriptural people. But back to the ethical issue. With the concept that all truth is of God, all truth is good truth, all truth can benefit mankind in some way.
Right.
This is an age-old argument, which you mentioned Star Trek earlier. This has been dealt with in Star Trek episodes as well. The medical experiments in Nazi Germany. Mm-hmm. You knew I was going there, didn't you?
Right.
Okay. The medical experiments in Nazi Germany. Now the argument is, do we use the findings of that? Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of outcry about this type of stuff.
Right.
Do we use that to better mankind, or do we ignore these advances in medicine that were done through these horrendous, abysmal things,
Yeah.
So
my choice would be to decry the methods that were used. On the other hand, one has examples scripturally of God taking really bad situations and bad behavior and turning them for positive ends. Classic example being Joseph. His brothers sold him into slavery. Joseph, at the end, after he's one of the rulers of Egypt, and his brothers are all afraid after their father dies that Joseph is going to seek revenge against them. Joseph makes a comment in chapter 50 of Genesis that you intended this to harm me, but God intended it for good, that many lives would be saved. And so what the Nazis did in their experiments is absolutely reprehensible. It cannot be justified under any circumstances. Yet, we can take that evil thing and pervert it.
And that's my point. And to use any medical advance that came out of that.
And that way the victims, in some sense, are...
There's some meaning to those deaths.
Yes, their deaths become in some way... I mean, it's not a justification. You don't want to lessen the horror of what happened.
And it's not like you're promoting doing that in the future. Like, we need to do more of this same kind of research because look what came from this. It's done. There's nothing you can do to change what's happened in the past. But like you said, then those deaths aren't in vain.
Right.
That some good did.
Do we choose not to use the increase in knowledge, the knowledge that was gained from that experience, and then potentially other people die because we didn't use that?
Right. Is that a good thing to allow people to die because you refuse to look at this thing?
Exactly.
That is, you have in law enforcement, you have the police making use of informants that are pretty disreputable people, and yet they get the information from them so that they can prevent something else bad happening.
Exactly. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think it is
a difficult issue, and it's a minefield that you're walking through, because you don't want to end up justifying this bad behavior and say, well, that's okay because this good thing came of it. No, it was not okay.
No, it was not okay, but retrospectively
we can take this horrible thing and we can twist it so it becomes a positive.
Well, so positive can come out of it.
Can come out of it.
Yes, and exactly. So we agree on that. I thought it was an important point to introduce into this whole argument.
Yeah, it kind of goes along with what we discussed here as well as last week. So, true.
Okay, let me give you the information. It's the quarter hour, so the ICQ number is 570-531-08. Ruth, do we have an instant messenger ID?
No, I couldn't get it to connect. There's something with the connection. I got to ask the guys out there.
Okay.
It has something to do with things.
Well, Ruth failed us. No, I'm just kidding. It's not her fault. And you can email us at thebox@theology.edu.
You're assuming anybody understands that.
I want to take a minute and give a plug to the school, Quartz Hill School of Theology. Doesn't matter where you are in the country, you can participate as a student at Quartz Hill School of Theology over the internet. We have an internet program. We are working on getting our whole associate's degree up there, are we not, Robin? I'm challenging you with getting the associate, at least the associates maybe in the near future sometime up on the website.
Eventually, about what we have on the website right now gives you a 1-year diploma in Bible. What we're still lacking...
Completely applicable to the associates.
It's applicable to the associates. Several of the things that are up there are applicable to the associates, but what we're still lacking is History of Civilization. It is a world history class. That's not up on the website yet, and so until that's up there, oh well. I also have to finish getting the Hebrew course up on the website. I've got like the first 9 lessons up. I haven't got the whole thing up, and so you have to have that there because the requirement for the associate's degree is both a year of Greek as well as a year of Hebrew.
Right. Tough language requirement here at Quartz Hill School of Theology, but that's for your benefit, so I don't want to hear any complaining. Okay.
Yeah, particularly since he had to go through it.
Yeah, I had to go through all that, so okay.
Why should anybody else slide?
That's it. No mercy. I encourage you to check out our website for the Quartz Hill School of Theology. That is theology.edu. That's one gem of a web address. And you can find all kinds of information there. You can find out about little green men. You can find out all kinds of funny stuff, can't we, Robin?
Yeah. No, that's the title.
Our School of Theology is located in Area 50. No. Just kidding. Beyond the Box, you can participate. Well, actually, we're 10 minutes out from the end of the program, but we'd encourage you to participate. Tell a friend. Tell a friend. We're looking to increase our listenership and have fun and talk about theology.
Yes. Okay. Well, go on with a little bit more of the weirdness from Tipler's standpoint and what modern physics can do to mess with our ideas of theology. See, this is from Pannenberg's. He did a presentation a few years ago on Tipler and made several interesting comments. And he says that when Christian theology conceives of the universe in terms of creation, the universe gets described from the point of view of God, not reversely God by extrapolation from the universe. The fundamental assertion of the doctrine of creation is that its every existence from God's point of view is contingent. That means neither existence nor essence of our universe are necessary from God's point of view. The universe could be different or not exist at all. It is an implication of the idea of God that he himself cannot be non-existent. That is to say, when God exists, he does so by himself. The universe, by contrast, is contingent. Its existence is a manifestation of God's free decision, and its existence continues to depend upon him. In that sense, it is created. If the universe would exist necessarily as God does, then it would be a correlate of God from eternity, and the existence of the universe could not be a manifestation of the freedom and love of God, the Creator, but would be a condition of God's own identity, a condition that would not be within his power.
That would be, the universe would be pantheistic at that point.
Well, the universe, if the universe is necessary, then some would argue that puts the universe almost up there with God. Now, also, according to Christian doctrine, generally speaking, we think in terms of only one universe, not a plurality of worlds, in the sense that specific interpretations of quantum mechanics has thought of the many worlds hypothesis developed by Hugh Everett in 1957. However, the many worlds hypothesis, I would suggest, is not at odds with Christian theology and is entirely a possibility. It does make for a very odd notion of what the universe is like, though. Kepler is convinced of the possibility of the many worlds hypothesis. Can you summarize what the many worlds hypothesis is?
Sure, that there's many worlds in a hypothesis. No, just kidding. Well, I was going to ask you in terms of, not in terms of the many worlds hypothesis, but in terms of, and we're 10 minutes out from the show, so we can't really go there.
We can just throw these things out.
Yeah, but I was thinking, we should probably do a show dealing with, is there life on other planets? Because that brings a whole lot of different theological understanding.
Yeah, next week's show, incidentally, will be on, is there a God?
Okay. And we'll have God as our guest.
And he can answer that question.
Yeah, he'll answer for himself through general revelation. But we probably should do that, because these are all, because really, if we accept the multi-world hypothesis, then it's not so unclosely related to the same argument, is there life on other planets? Is there life somewhere else out there?
Yeah. And the many worlds hypothesis is an interpretation of the data that comes to us from experiments in quantum physics. That is, for instance,
we're getting click, 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 click all over here.
It's like a newsroom.
Yeah.
When
many worlds hypothesis.
Yes, many worlds hypothesis. Thank you. My brain will come together eventually.
Sometime in the future, he has a hope.
Yes. Many worlds hypothesis assumes that when a particle is spit out by, say, the electron gun in your television set, it has a range of places that it might end up. In the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, you have this range of potentials, which are these ghost-like things, and the reality is when you make the observation, all these potential realities collapse into the one reality that is us.
Right.
Many world hypothesis says there is no collapse.
Right. Each and every possibility does happen.
All the possible tracks of that electron from the electron gun in your television set, they actually occur, and so likewise, every possibility that could happen in the universe does occur.
Yeah, every effect or every cause has an infinite number of effects.
That is, in some universe, I did have a cheese sandwich for lunch.
Exactly. Every decision we make launches an infinite number of
everything
universes
that happens,
and possibilities.
You have an infinite number of universes.
Right. So
which is very odd. It's a very odd way of looking at things, but actually there's no way at this point experimentally to decide clearly which of the potential interpretations of quantum physics is correct. Copenhagen, up until probably last 10, 15, 20 years, was the dominant position, which is that you had one reality which you found when you did observation. Many worlds hypothesis is actually much more
overtaking that.
Yeah, it's more widely held now than it used to be.
Right. Well, the thing is,
Kepler actually argues it's the majority viewpoint.
Oh, really? Well, see, the Copenhagen idea, it gives us a better, I think, a better sense of security in
Well, actually, what's his name? Einstein did not like the Copenhagen interpretation at all. He hated it. He argued that God does not play dice with the universe. Now that many worlds hypothesis didn't come along until 57, Einstein died in 55, so he never heard of this particular interpretation. Although Einstein is one of the people responsible for quantum physics, he never liked it because of the uncertainty of it. That is, that you have this fuzzy thing that you can't really decide one way or the other.
Finger on it.
And the nice thing about the many worlds hypothesis is it gives us reality again. That is, these different possibilities are real. They're not just these fuzzy potentialities, which is not something that Einstein liked. Yes?
We have an ICQ.
Wow, we finally were able to say something that got somebody to ICQ us.
Actually, they are just tuning in.
Oh, they
we were
just
at a different time than we are because this person is way, like, in another country.
Yeah, that does make it hard.
England, actually.
Oh, wow.
And
2 in the morning there.
he's saying all his energy. Interesting point is when they discovered quartz, which disappeared and appeared, I believe, maybe suggesting a higher vibration of atomic existence, i.e., where did they come from, because they were definitely there and then not, giving much credence to the fact of other worlds existing on different levels.
Yeah. Well, quarks are part of the what makes up the larger particles like electrons.
Isn't he a bartender?
They're part of the pieces that make up the larger particles that people are more familiar with when they think of atoms, that is electrons, neutrons, protons. However, you do have something that is very strange to think of. It's what's called virtual particles, and you do have particles that pop in and out of existence constantly. When we think of space, we have a tendency to
like an idea in your head.
Right. We tend to think of space as being empty. Space is not empty. Space is part. Modern physics talks about the fabric of space-time. As it is something, and it's this bubbling sea of virtual particles popping. It's a cauldron of particles popping in and out of existence. It's seething. And it is a very odd thing. So, yeah.
Okay.
Nice comment.
All right, next week's show is on Is There a God?
Should we keep people waiting breathlessly as to what the answer to that question is?
Suppose
you
have
may guess what our likely...
Well, my profession is in vain if there's not.
Yeah, I'm kind of wasting my time, too.
Yeah.
It's odd that we'd have a show and the website and all this if we think there is no God. So
yeah.
Probably will come down on the side that, yes, there is a God. We'll be giving evidence to suggest
So all you atheists that are seeing red at the moment after listening to us for that, well, even you theists that are seeing red out there, give us a call next week, participate in the show. It's forget about all the information. You can find everything at www.theology.edu. Thanks for joining us today. We ask you to come back and bring a friend and participate. Thank you, and God bless. You've been listening to Beyond the Box. Theology is not a finished set of dogmatic propositions. Rather, theology is a wide-open field of endeavor. God is not tame. He does not easily fit into any set of propositions. A simple equation, a small or large box, nothing can fit who God is. Solomon, as he contemplated the temple he had built, stated, "But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built?" Metaphorically, we might argue the same. God is infinite and we are finite. Thus, we can only comprehend a finite portion of Him. There are more questions than answers in the field of theology, and our job on this program, like theology courses that are offered at Quartz Hill School of Theology, will be more to ask those endless questions than to give any settled answers. We would like to thank you for listening today, and we would invite you to view our website at www.theology.edu. We would also like to thank Quantum Networking Solutions for hosting this program at www.whatson.net. Thank you for listening today. God bless you, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.